I'll introduce myself. My name is Allison Vick. I am the historian and program coordinator for the Tennessee Holocaust Commission. And the commission was created in 1984 to bring Holocaust education and remembrance to communities and schools across the state. And so it is my deep privilege and pleasure to welcome everybody who is here tonight and thank you for joining us. We have a phenomenal speaker who is known worldwide in this field, who has agreed to dedicate some time tonight to share with us his testimony of surviving the Holocaust. And so I cannot emphasize enough what a privilege and an honor this is. And so with that, I want to introduce you to Mr. Pinchas Guter, who is coming to us from Toronto tonight. Pinchas was born into a well-established family in Łódź, Poland. When he was 7 years old, World War II erupted in 1939. And he and his twin sister Sabina and his entire family fled Łódź, Poland to Warsaw after his father was severely beaten by the Nazis. He and his family were then incarcerated in the Warsaw ghetto for 3.5 years until April of 1943, whereupon the entire family was deported to Majdanek death camp in far eastern Poland. He was then sent to a labor camp and passed through several other concentration camps, notably Buchenwald. And towards the end of the war, he was forced on a death march from Germany to Theresienstadt in present-day in Czechoslovakia, and was liberated by the Russians in May of 1945, whereupon he was taken to Britain for rehabilitation. After spending many years in South Africa, he immigrated to Canada, where he lives now with his wife. And Pinchas divides his time now between speaking out against the Holocaust and volunteering as a chaplain and honorary full-time cantor in the Kiewer Schule. And with that, I want to remind audience too that I know you will have a lot of questions, so please put them in the question and answer, and we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end of his presentation. But now, please join me in welcoming Mr. Pinchas Guter.
Good evening, everybody, and I would like to thank the Tennessee Holocaust Commission for inviting me. I think it's quite an honor for me to speak to you all. And I would like to give you a small synopsis of my experiences during the Holocaust. I was born in 1932, so I was kind of I was actually going on 8. And I think the most important thing is, let me give you the demographics of Łódź, the place that I was born in. Łódź was the second largest city in Poland. It had about 750,000 people living there, all of them Polish citizens. Some of them, like the United States and like Canada, came from different countries. And I think the demographics are very important because of what happened later on. There were 100,000 original German-speaking people who came from the time when Poland was occupied for 150 years until 1919 by the Prussian, Russian, and Austro-Hungarian empires. So they were Polish citizens and they regarded themselves as Poles, but they were also, their origins were from Germany and from, well, not Germany, but from the Austro-Hungary and Prussia. There were 250,000 Jewish people living, a very large part of Łódź was Jewish people were living there. And the most important aspect of the industry, Łódź was not a very big city, was not a old city. It was a young city, and it was created by mostly the German-speaking people because they brought the textile industry. And by the 1920s, 30s, it was one of the second largest cities, which had more factories than anything else, turning out textile goods. My family were winemakers, and I belonged to a very religious family. And my mother could only have 2 children because she gave birth to us I had a sister and we were twins. And after that, she couldn't have any more children because she had a very bad birth and whatever had happened then, I'm not quite sure, but she had an operation and she couldn't have any more children. So our immediate family was small. And my in my kind of bigger family, the Gutter family was actually quite large. And we go back 400 years in Poland. My grandfather had a scroll, like a Torah scroll, and which he used to take out from time to time, and tell us the genealogy of the Gutter family. And I have actually managed, um, since not so long ago, I managed to obtain from Poland a list of my eldest great, 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 great grandfather, who was named Leib Gutter, and he was born in 1760. So at least I've got that. But my grandfather said and we were winemakers. In our family, we were always winemakers. And when I was about between the age of 3 and 4, I don't exactly remember when it was, I started going to a religious school to start the Old Testament, and at the same time, the Torah and the Chumash, and I started also learning how to become a future wine master. And I was a very happy child before the war, despite the anti-Semitism that came about from 1935, particularly. There were parties that wanted the Jews to disappear from Poland. And I will share with you one experience to give you an illustration of what happened to me. I was about 5 years old when I had um, uh, pneumonia. And pneumonia in those days with no antibiotics was a very dangerous illness. And we had a doctor whose name was, I still remember his name. His name was Dr. Hirschwinkel. He was of German extraction. He wasn't Jewish, but he was a very good doctor, and he was our doctor. And he managed somehow, after all kinds of things like Chinese cups and blood taken from my father and injected to me, nothing helped. But he managed to get sulfur drugs, which were the precursor to antibiotics from Vienna. And he gave me those tablets, and I started recovering. When I recovered sufficiently after about 6 or 7 weeks, he decided that it would be the good thing to send me to a place where you could breathe easily. Poland is a flat country, but it's got one range of mountains, the Tatra Mountains, and in those days it was between Poland and Czechoslovakia. And those were beautiful mountains with rivers and lakes and stuff like that, just like you go to Switzerland and you look at the pictures and you can see that. And I was sent to live with Gurale, the mountain people, in huts. And for me, it was a wonderful thing because I didn't have to go to school. I didn't have to pray every day. I could just run around and enjoy myself. And my grandfather on my maternal side was a farmer. And because I used to spend times on the farm as a child, I was very familiar with animals, so we lived together with the animal in huts and in tents and stuff like that. And I loved horses particularly. So I was very happy. I used to run down on Sundays where the local orchestra used to play, the army orchestra, the fire brigade, the police, all the different orchestra used to come. There was a beautiful little kind of place where they used to gather, and I used to sit on the grass, and I would listen to them, and that was wonderful. On the way back, and in my family, there were no singers, there were no people particularly interested in music, but I was always interested in sounds and music, and to this day I am. And on the way back, I would stop outside the church. They had a very beautiful church in Stavnica. That was the place on the Tatra Mountains. And it was halfway between the mountain and me coming down. I knew I couldn't go inside the church, so I would stand quite a little bit away in kind of completely immersed in the sounds of the organ and the choir. One day, I forgot myself. I didn't go inside the church, but I went towards very near, and I went to the first steps. There were 3 steps to go into the door of the church, and I knelt on them because I felt so enamored of the sounds that I couldn't help myself. I was just there, like in a dream. Suddenly, I felt somebody hitting me, and I looked around, and there was a middle-aged man, and he started hitting me because he realized I was a Jewish boy. I had my side lock still, and I was wearing a hat, a little bit different to this, but it was like a Jewish little hat. And he chased me away, and he said, "How dare you contaminate the soil of our Holy Mother?" Poland is a very Catholic country, and the Holy Mother is a patron saint uh, in Poland, and so he chased me away, and I've never forgotten it. I still remember some of the sounds of the music that I listened from that church. I didn't know if it was Brahms or Beethoven or Mozart, but I inhaled those sounds. And there were other little, I used to play with Christian children, and then they would pull my side locks and they would say, Żydzi do Palestiny, which means in Polish, Jews go to Palestine. Don't stay here. Just get away. But we still had a very beautiful life. My sister and I, we would take the big pot. Jews are not allowed to cook on Saturdays, so my mother used to prepare a big pot with barley and meat and all kinds of goodies. And then we used to take it to the baker, and then Saturdays after services, we used to run to the baker and collect it, and we used to wait, and we had holidays, and it was like most of the Jews that lived in Łódź were very poor, and they worked a lot in the factories of textile owned by Jews and Germans mainly, or German-speaking Polish people, the 100,000 that were there approximately. And that was life. It was beautiful. Saturdays, for example, was like being in Jerusalem because the factories closed because the Jews wouldn't work on Saturdays. So it was, you had Saturdays and Sundays was closed, and we played and we enjoyed ourselves, and everything was fine. As in the smaller villages, things weren't so good, but in the big town like Łódź, there was anti-Semitism, but we still lived a very happy life. That all changed on the 1st of September 1939, when the Nazis attacked Poland for no rhyme or reason, and they arrived in Łódź. They occupied Łódź, I don't remember exactly, but I would say within 10 days, 8 days or something, they were very quickly arrived there. And behind them came the security services, which of course now I know this was the Gestapo and the SS. At that time, I had no idea. My grandparents, my father's parents, we lived in 2 small apartments, and my father's and mother's bedroom had an interleading door that went into the bedroom of my grandfather and grandmother. And they actually had 2 separate doors where you could go in from the steps, so it was like 2 little apartments, but they had this joined door. Now, you remember I told you that we had 100,000 German-speaking people. Their origin was from Austria-Hungary and Prussia. As soon as the Nazis took over Łódź, these people became the Herrenvolk. They became the masters of Łódź. They had little pins with swastikas, which they put on their. The men put it on the lapels. The women used to stick on their shirts, and and when you kind of Jews lost their jobs, they lost they took away their bank accounts. You could only take so much money a week. They gave you so much. Jews only had the 2 hour time to go out and shop. There was a special curfew for Jews. There was a normal curfew for everybody else, but there was a special curfew for Jews. They took away their bicycles, their radios, jewelry if they could. And as I told you, we became completely like berserk because we couldn't do anything that was normal. If you went, for example, you saw a soldier, or even an ordinary German with his lapel, you had to get off the sidewalk and into the road and take off your hat and bow, and sometimes they would slap you, sometimes they would. If you had a little convenience store, they would chase you out. And if you had a little tailor place or a shoemaker place or anything like that, they would chase you out, and it was taken over by Germans. They would walk in, chase the person out, and say, we are now becoming, and they were the masters of Łódź. Then they had a list of notables. And the notables weren't Jews only. It was mainly non-Jews. These were bishops, priests, anybody that was a notable in Łódź would be arrested. And they had from the fifth column, I don't know if everybody knows what the fifth column was, but these were spies. Not every German-speaking person in Łódź was heinous or tried to do bad things, but some of them did, and they were like spies, and they prepared lists before the war, long before the war, and gave it to the security service and say, this is the mayor of this, and this is the notables, and these are the rich people, Polish, Jewish, Christian, whatever. And my grandfather was the head of an NGO, and where they used to teach people to become rabbis. And he was on one of the lists. He was 78 years old. He was sick because he had a kidney operation just before the war started, and he was lying in bed sick. Suddenly, there was the war was still raging. It was 2 or something weeks into the war, and there was a ring at the bell of my grandfather's entrance door from the stairs. And my father went through the bedroom, and he opened the door, and they asked for my grandfather. He took them into the bedroom. They looked at him, and they said, what's the matter with him? He's dying. He's had an operation. So they decided not to take him, and they said, who are you? What are you doing here? To my father. And my father said, I am a son. What do you do? I make wine. Where do you make wine? And so he said, Nowomiejska number 19. So they took him. It wasn't far from where we lived. It was cellars where the winemaking was. So they took him there, and they beat him, first of all, so badly, they thought they maybe have murdered him, and they threw him into a corner, and then they went back upstairs, and they told the military police of the Germans that all the trucks with soldiers going to the front must come and help themselves. So they destroyed something that was there. I've got records of 70, 80 years. They destroyed it in 2 or 3 days, something like that. They took out 11,000 bottles of wine. The caretaker saw them taking my father down, and when they all left and they destroyed all the cellars, and they even broke the vats, and they took it out, whatever was in the vats with jerry cans, he found my father, who was still alive, and he risked his life, put him on his shoulder, and walked with him, braving curfew, all the way to our house. And Dr. Hirschwinkel, the German, individual who was our doctor, he nursed my father for about 7, 8 days, and my father recovered. To cut a long story short, then the Germans they decided to incorporate Łódź and the province of where Łódź was into Germany proper, into the Reich. And they were going to have a boundary between and a granite, a border which was going to be guarded. And we were all in our family, we were all blonde and blue-eyed. And my mother was a very beautiful Nordic-looking woman. She was quite tall and she was always elegant. So my father decided he had a younger sister living in Warsaw, and Warsaw was occupied Poland with a governor who decided Krakow was going to be the head of the place where he is going to sit in the king's palace, or the original king's palace. And he made him, they used to call him, Hans Frank was regarded as the king of Poland. He was a close associate of Hitler. And so we went to the train station. By that time, Jews couldn't use public parks. They couldn't do anything, as I told you before. So we went as Christians to the train station, and we took, my mother bought tickets. They cut my side locks, and I got dressed like everybody else, and my mother and my sister. And we went, and nobody asked us any questions. She bought tickets, and we went by train. It was, I would say, the end of November or maybe the middle of December. I don't remember exactly what time it was. And we went all the way to Warsaw, and we joined up with our aunt, who had the same name as my twin sister. Her name was also Sabina. And we lived, and already 17, together with us, there were 17 people living there, because some of them ran away from different places, and we were all staying there. My father, who had a little beard, he cut parts of it out, but he had a beard, and he was sallow. He was dark looking. He couldn't smuggle himself as a Christian. He wasn't blue-eyed. So he walked, and it took him about 2.5 months to arrive in Warsaw. Friendly farmers hid him in the farms, and Poland was full of forests. It's not so much anymore like these days, but it was full of forests. He would sleep, during the day and cover himself with leaves, and he would walk during the night. When he arrived, he found a little apartment, and because he had to make a living, we had to do something. He would buy, things were very bad, and he would buy on the black market raisins, and you can make wine for just about everything. So he would buy raisins, and he found this little apartment, which was about the size of a schoolroom, divided into a small kitchen in Nalewki number 49, and he put 2 stills in the kitchen, and he started making wine, and he gave me a rucksack, and I went to outside before the ghetto was only formed in November, was finalized in November of 1940. So all this time I went to look at different cafes and collect bottles, which he would clean, and I would deliver on Friday. There were Jewish people who had money, and he would give me addresses, and I would take it. And this is how we made a living in the beginning of until such time. And even when the ghetto was closed, I still continued. There were a lot of Jewish people in the ghetto who still had money, despite the fact, 350,000 people were pushed into an area which was only 2.8% of the size of Warsaw. So you can imagine that they set up a Judenrat, which was a Jewish community council, Jewish police, Jewish bank, Jewish prison, Jewish everything. I mean, it was like almost going to be a separate municipal entity that was going to be independent, except it wasn't. Our president of our city of the council, whose name was Chernyakov, he was an engineer, and he would have every day 2 German Gestapo people coming to him, and they would tell him, today we want 50,000 people as slaves, or this and that and the other, whatever they told him. And let me tell you what kind of rations we used to get. We got our official rations for everybody was 180 calories a day. Now, you know, a Mars bar has got more than 180 calories. You can't live on it. Now, the Nazis, together with their Polish police, which were collaborating, the blue police was a collaborating police, and the Jewish police, who were also some of them cooperators, collaborators. I am not going to judge people today what they did during the times of the war. But the fact was they started the black market, and fortunately for the Warsaw Ghetto, a lot of people actually lived because they started selling everything. First, they started selling their jewelry if they had anything. Then they started selling their bedding. And then they started selling some of their clothing. But at the same time, there are two things that were happening in the Warsaw Ghetto. Hunger and disease was terrible because not only did we have 350,000 people, but at the same time, they brought people from overseas and from all the different little towns surrounding Warsaw. They brought them in. So by the end of 1941, there were close to between 450,000 to 500,000 Jewish people living in the Warsaw Ghetto. 10 to a room, 12 to a room, people living in halls. They opened the synagogues. They opened every place where people could be, and some of them couldn't even be in places where there was shelter. Poland has got terrible winters. Disease started. If you go to the Jewish cemetery today, you will see a place, a grave that was dug, a huge pit, and in it are buried something between 90 to 100,000 people that died between 1940 and 1942 July, when the deportation started, which I'm going to talk to you in a little bit, in a few minutes. In the meantime, my father continued making this wine, and I used to continue going with my rucksack to people who still had money to be able to give it to them on Friday, because Friday night you make blessing over the wine and bless God for with it, and so we existed. We existed, but at the same time, when I used to go, for example, and there were lots of cafes run by the black marketeers who, for as a matter of fact, as I told you, it was fantastic for the ghetto because at least some people who had some things could actually continue to live and buy food that was brought in by these collaborators and the German security services that enjoyed themselves. And there were lots of cafes in the Warsaw Ghetto, and there was music and entertainment and all kinds of things. And at the same time, they wouldn't allow us to do anything. For example, the schools were closed. There were no, but my father found a teacher, and in a cellar, 7 or 8 of us, boys, because boys and girls didn't study together in very religious communities, and he would, as long as he had some money, he would give this money to this teacher, and we would go there 3, 4 times a week and study the Old Testament and the Talmud and things like that. In the meantime, I would stand outside a cafe where I went to try and collect some bottles, and I would see inside through the window people who were dancing, enjoying themselves, drinking, and I could scent the geese that are being roasted, and of course, only a few people could afford that, and only the collaborators, cooperators, or whoever was cooperating or working together with the Germans or with the black market. And next to me were dead bodies because people started dying and this little boy, his emotions were completely stilted. He existed in this kind of environment without thinking. Death was an enemy. It wasn't a normal thing to die. It was an enemy, and you had to fight this enemy. So it wasn't like a normal thing that you were born and you grew up and you went to school, you got married, you had a family, you grew hopefully to be an old person and with a large family, and then you died, which was the right thing to that's happening. That happens in a normal society. But I regarded death as an enemy, yet to fight it. So I became oblivious to it. And one day I saw a scene where the Jewish Community Council created a burial society, but they were not like a normal burial society where rabbis came and they said prayers. They had just wooden carts and they would collect the bodies in the streets just like you collect garbage. This went on. It was an apocalyptic hell. And at the same time, I must say that remember, resistance is not necessarily with a gun. Everything that happened in the Warsaw Ghetto was resistance. They had underground universities. They had underground hospitals. They had proper hospitals. They had everything they could. They taught people how to become engineers. They taught people how to become doctors. They tried everything. They had a self-help society that used to collect money from people that were even the black marketeers and people that still had, rich people that still were in the ghetto and had money, and they created soup kitchens and they would give people at least a piece of bread and a bowl of soup every day. So we tried our best, and human beings tried their best to help whoever there was around and who suffered. On July the 22nd of 1942, placards appeared on the walls. And on these placards, the Germans were very clever. They didn't say that you are going to be deported. They didn't say everybody is going to be deported. They said we are going to relocate part of the community of Warsaw, of the Warsaw Ghetto. People who don't have jobs, people who don't work, because they set up lots of German factories inside the ghetto and outside the ghetto, and columns of people used to go to work, and they would get a little bit better food for that. So people were anxious to go to work for these factories. But they said anybody who's got no place to live in, living in the streets, we are going to relocate you to the east where you're going to go farms and you can take 15 kilos of each person can take 15 kilos with you. We are going to give you 3 kilo bread and jam for the journey. And people started to volunteer to go because, people that were starving, they heard about food and so forth, they went there. But immediately, one wanted to know where these trains are going. And some people that were taken on the trains managed to smuggle themselves back, and they came back to the ghetto. And then we knew that there's a place called Treblinka. It's only about an hour and a half or so from the Warsaw Ghetto. And everybody that comes there, there are red flags, when people with white coats, with megaphones, and with Red Cross flags, and they say, this is a place where you're going to be disinfected because you're all dirty, and you got to have a journey, and we're going to give you food, and if you got shoes with shoelaces, you must tie them up because you must find them when you come out of the cleansing and disinfection. And of course they would go in, but they wouldn't come out because they were being murdered. Twice a day, the trains would go. They would go in the morning and they would come back. And that's how they found out when they saw the same locomotives with the same numbers coming back very quickly to take the next lot. They found out, and this is what happened. My father did not trust the Germans. The Germans would fool you. They would issue certificates for those people that are not going to be relocated or deported. But my father didn't trust them because of his experience, maybe. So he hid us. So we lasted in the Warsaw Ghetto until the uprising on the 19th of April, 1943. By that time, there were lulls in between, and the building that we lived in, the front of it, was destroyed by a bomb. So underneath that building, it was on the corner of Nalewki 49 and Mila, which is a very famous street because the headquarters of the uprising was number 18. And so we had an entrance. It was like a mine. They built a bunker like a mine underneath there. And and the one thing I want to tell you, that we never forgot our existence. We never forgot who we were. My father had a few bottles of wine, and the baker, there were wild Jews, 30, 40,000, and there were official Jews, like 30,000 working in the German factories that were there. And the baker used to bake bread for them. So in the meantime, he must have, just because the 19th of April was the eve of Passover, he must have baked some matzos, because we heard that the Germans were coming to take everybody away. They were going to relocate the people that were working for the factories to a place called Travniki, and we, the rest of the wild Jews, are going to be taken. We knew we were going to be taken to Treblinka to be killed. We were in that bunker for 3 weeks. In the first week of May, we were discovered, and we had, we had air vents in the ruins, and through the air vents came sound, and I don't remember, I think it was in German and in Polish and maybe in Yiddish, and they said, if you don't come out in half an hour, we are going to throw gas bombs and you're going to all die. So we came out. And when we came out, they took us to the Umschlagplatz, the place where they deported you. We stayed there for something like 36 hours in one room. They didn't give you any food. They didn't allow you to go out. So you can imagine what kind of place this became. Women, pregnant, children, babies, infants, old men, people like my sister and I. My father was like a giant. I mean, he was a very simple person. He used to get up in the morning and study the holy books and go to work. And yet, during the war, he became like a giant. He saved a sock of sugar. The guards, if you gave them some jewelry, they would give you a bottle of water. So when my father saw that, and we couldn't even lie down in that room. They pushed so many people in, you could either stand or kneel. So my father saved a sock of sugar with a teaspoon, and when he saw them giving people water, he found out that if you give them jewelry. So he took my mother's ring off her finger, her wedding ring, and he went and gave it to one of the guards, and he gave him a big bottle of water. And he gave the children some water and a teaspoon of sugar. They never touched it. We were then chased into the barracks after being there for 36 hours, and I can't even imagine today, although I have a photographic memory and I can see the pictures, but I can't imagine that we could actually exist in a place like that. You can imagine what happened in 36 hours, not being allowed to go out, no food, no water, and people who didn't have jewelry couldn't get anything. We were chased into the wagons and we started going. I don't know how long the journey lasted, and we came to a place where we were unloaded, and we found out that this was not Treblinka. It was a place called Lublin, a town in Poland called Lublin. And they took us out of the trains. A lot of people died inside from suffocation because they put so many people in. So all the dead people were kind of put aside, and they marched us to a place which we afterwards, of course, I found out was Majdanek. And it was another camp, which I didn't know exactly what it was all about. And then they started separating men from women, women with children, children on their own. My father must have known something. So he told me, say that you are 16. I was going on 11. I was 10 years old, and I was turning 11 in July. But he said, say you are 5 years or 6 years older. And suddenly, my sister was separated from my mother. My mother was studying with the women, and my sister saw her. She had this long blonde braid, and she started running towards my mother, and then she hugged her. So I was watching her braid, and this sister of mine, who I lived with 11 years almost, and who was born together with me, to this day, having a photographic memory, not having any photographs left over from the war, I remember everybody, uncles, great uncles, all kinds of people, but I don't remember anything about my sister. I can, for example, when we used to go and walk to the baker to collect the pot for Saturday lunch, I know she's walking next to me, but I can't see her. So all I remember was the blonde braid. And if you look at the book that I published with Azrieli, you can see her braid because I I felt so strong about it that I actually wrote the book in her honor. And then they took everybody away. We were the last ones. They chased us into a barrack, and then they told us to undress naked. We were running with our hands up, and there were right, left, right, left. There was a man with a white coat with a stick. He may have been a doctor, I don't know. And I came into a room and I saw shower heads, and I knew that the shower heads, they try to fool you to the last minute. So gas is going to come out. So I started saying my prayers because I wanted to die an honest Jew. But water came out water came out. And then they chased us into a barrack and they gave us those striped clothes, prisoner clothes with a round head and wooden clogs. And they chased us out for a roll call. And I started looking for my father because I thought, well, this is maybe a place where they do take you to work because I am alive. So my father must be alive, my mother must be alive, my sister must be alive. And I looked for them, but I couldn't find them. And then we were chased into a barrack, not giving anything to eat after a couple of days. And they made us sleep. And the next day, there were roll calls taking people to work. Majdanek was a place of terror. And we were, instead of having tractors and things, they walked us. If you go to Majdanek today, you can see the rollers. They were building roads and aerodromes, and the men will be used as horses. So we dragged those rollers and things like that. And after being there for 3 months, I was chosen to become a slave laborer. And fortunately for me, because afterwards in November of that year, they killed most of the people, most of the Jews that were in Majdanek. Majdanek had 5 camps, one for women, and there were Polish political prisoners, Polish prisoners of war, and so forth and so on. So I came to a place called Szawnica, which was built by the Polish government before the war as an ammunition factories, camouflaged in forests. The Nazis took it over, and these became factories of death because they had selections to there. And instead of gassing you, they would take you to the forest and shoot you if you couldn't continue working. Fortunately for me, the internal administration was Jewish, and there was a Jewish police just like in the Warsaw ghetto. And the Jewish policeman who I was assigned to work with, he had his wife there who was suffering for TB, and she was in the police barrack. And because she was the wife of a so-called collaborator policeman or whatever, she was allowed to live there. And some of these policemen and administrators who were cooperating, trying to make a living, they were allowed to have families, and they were much better off. They had separate barracks and they had plenty of food. We were starving. And he said to me, if you work from dawn, we work from dawn to dusk, 12 hours. If you work with me, and he assigned me to work not with the acids inside in the core, where people were kind of dying every 3 months. You couldn't, there was an acid called a kind of specific acid, picrina. And after the war, I found out it was picric acid. It made you yellow. People started looking like canaries. They were everything of them, hair, body, everything. And it went through your body, and it created your havoc inside your lungs and liver and everything. And you couldn't last more than about 3-4 months. A cousin of mine who came from Lodz as a slave laborer there, he didn't last very long. I was at his wedding in 1938 when I was a little boy, and he had a child and a wife who were murdered by the Nazis. He was in the Lodz ghetto, and he came there from the Lodz ghetto. and he didn't last longer than 3 months. I was there for quite a while. I looked after the wife of this policeman, Katz, and I became her nurse. I washed her, I cleaned her, she used to soil herself, I tried to feed her. She lasted 6 and 7 months because he used to get all kinds of medications for her, and she got better and she got worse, and then eventually she died within 6 or 7 months of me being there. About the end of July of 19, we didn't know the dates, but I knew what it was. It was the eve of Tisha B'Av, the ninth of the day of Av, when the destruction of the temples is commemorated and is fasting. We knew all those dates because there were Hasidic Jews in the camp, and they kept exactly how the dates were, the Jewish dates, at least, and we tried to pray. So when we came back from work, we were told we must go in front of the commander's office. He will be in the window, and you have to give your name. So we gave our name, and he made a tick. And then the next day, we didn't go to work. They woke us up and a roll call. And the commander came and he said, "We are liquidating this camp. You're going to a new camp, and there aren't sufficient rail trucks. And in those and you are going to. Some of you are going to walk, and some of you are going to go in the rail trucks. And all the people that I'm calling out the names are going to go in rail trucks, and the others will have to walk." Anyway, to cut a long story short, we found out that this was a selection to people to die. Anybody that was wearing, rags. I had rags by that time. I didn't even have proper shoes. I had a paper with wire around it because, they didn't give you new clothes. They didn't give you anything. And there was a lot of corruption even amongst the Jewish administration. If they liked you, they would, and even with the help of Katz, I couldn't get better clothing. So suddenly we realized, and there was a woman who was very close to the commander, and she had this, because she was a prominent person, and she was a cooperator, collaborator, whatever, she had her mother there, an elderly mother. So he called out the mother's name, but he didn't call out her name. So she ran to him, pulled his sleeve. I didn't hear what she was saying. She obviously wanted to go together with her mother. And she was almost like a friend of his. We used to see her walking together with him, and they were laughing. She was a physician, and she treated the guards, and she treated the SS in Shavnitz, in the place, and in this. And she was a well-known person in Poland as a physician, a good physician. He lost his temper. After a while, he pushed her away, and they called the mother, and he shot them both. And we knew it was a selection for that. So we started running and hiding. I hid myself. The barracks were built on stilts, so I burrowed myself. Providentially, or I don't know how, Katz found me. So he pulled me out, and he said, if they find you, because they started, the SS, the guards, and everybody, if they found somebody hiding, they had a new roll call, and he was going to choose, if he had 500 people on the list of killing, then he was going to choose 500 people. He pulled me out, took me to the police barracks. He said, I'm going to help you. Took off all my rags, combed my hair, rubbed lipstick of his dead wife into my cheeks to make me look well, because I was thin like a rake. He gave me proper clothing, underwear, shirts, shoes, proper boots, and pants, and a jacket, and and a hat, and a hat actually very close to what I'm wearing today. And he said, "Go out. There's going to be a roll call, and with God's help, you'll survive." And then Schultz went from row to row to row, but now they had a ring, and the ring was closely guarded. Anybody that tried to run away between their legs or something like that was shot on the spot, shot and killed, because there was no more nonsense about people going to this way, that way, and the other way. And he would, and until he got his number, he came and stood in front of me. And I thought he recognized me when I gave my name, but he didn't take me. He took his hand without looking, and Yakov, my best friend, he threw him into the ring of everybody. And for 50 odd years, I was, I was, I kind of, I couldn't believe that he died. I couldn't believe that he was killed because I almost felt that he was taken, instead of me, because he was looking at me, he took him. So I mourned that boy who was 4 or 5 years older than me, and he was more of organized, and he would help me to understand things more than anything else. The next day, I was taken to Częstochowa to work with steel ingots, and then from there to Buchenwald, from Buchenwald to Kolditz. In Kolditz, I was there for about 3 months, and that was at the beginning of 1945. And the beginning of April, they started a death march to take us to Czechoslovakia. And we walked for about 2.5 to 3 weeks. And on the way, 1,500 of us left. We weren't in a camp, we were in a hall where they put bunks and they locked us up at night. And we walked there, about 1,500 of us, and on the way, anybody that couldn't keep up, they didn't give us any food. We drank water from ditches. We ate any grubs and any leaves that we could find. And only half of us arrived in Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. And then I was liberated on the 8th of May, exactly on the end of the war in 1945. So I will stop here.
All right. Thank you, Pinchas, for what is an incredibly powerful and important story. Thank you for taking time to share that with us. And I think I know I'm speaking for my team and probably for much of the audience as well, is that it's going to take a moment to sort of process everything that you've shared with us because it's so incomprehensible in a sense to most of us. But I did want to remind the audience to please put questions in chat and that we have a little bit of time to ask Pinchas some questions. So I'm going to take a quick look at those and we'll start the Q&A in just a moment. And Pinchas, I'm going to actually take one liberty, and that is I have one question I've always wanted to ask you is where you find your strength to continue to share this story over and over, because your story is very familiar to me, and I know that you've shared it widely. So can you tell us a little bit about where you came, like how you came to be able to speak about these experiences? Because I believe there was a time when you didn't speak as much about this.
Well, for many, many years, I wouldn't speak because you ask me a question, you have to listen to a story. In 1975 or 76 or something like that, I was asked by a friend, by I had a very close friend, and I was living in Cape Town at the time. And a brother of his was living in East London. They used to have ceremonies on the day of commemoration on Yom HaShoah. They have it at the cemeteries. They used to have it in the cemeteries, both in Cape Town and East London and Port Elizabeth and in Johannesburg. And they asked me whether I would speak at the cemetery. I originally didn't want to go to South Africa. I did everything in my power. I went to South America to work. I was from the age of 14. I didn't want to rely on charity, so I started working at the age of 14 as an apprentice motor mechanic, and I didn't want to. And I stayed with a Jewish family, and I became, a boarder, and then almost like a child of the family. And so I went to East London, despite the fact that I wasn't keen to talk, and I didn't talk before that because I want to keep. I had nightmares and things like that, but my wife was the one who saved me. She was a South African born, and we met in Jerusalem, and it's a long story about that. And we got married in England because I went back to England, and and because I was living in an apartheid state, I decided that I wasn't going to talk about the iniquity of the Shoah. I was also going to be talking about the iniquity. Now, prepared. Normally, I speak off the cuff. I don't like speaking and preparing speeches. But this time, I prepared a 4 or 5 page speech in which I castigated the government and told the story of mine, but at the same time, castigated them about the apartheid and everything else that they were doing to black people and to colored people and to Asian people, and divided people to different classes and so forth and so on. And when I came back to, after the ceremony, we went back to the apartment or the house of my my friend's brother, and I started shaking and shivering, and feeling very bad, and I'm almost kind of collapsed. And there were some doctors there, so they gave me some tea, and I'm almost sure they put something inside the tea because, immediately I fell asleep within 5 minutes. So when I woke up, I went back home and I said to my wife, it's bad enough that I'm having these nightmares and you're trying to keep my children away, because I didn't want them to become second generation, suffering from the Holocaust. And I was very poor and I had to work very hard, and life was not easy. So I decided I'm not talking about it. It was only in 1992, when I was living in South Africa, in Canada, that a woman by the name of Paula Draper, who was a professor at the time at the Toronto University, and she was taking testimonies from Holocaust survivors. Somehow they learned that I was a Holocaust survivor, and she started asking me to tell my story. She wanted to do a documentary on my story and film it in a proper. And I said, no, no, no. One day she came and she convinced me that it was correct to do it. And she did a 4-hour documentary, which is still today, you can get it from the Holocaust Center here in Toronto Holocaust Center. And she gave it to my children, who knew I was a Holocaust survivor, but I didn't want to burden them. And this is when I was asked to speak to people. And 2002, I was persuaded by then he wasn't, but later on became by Stephen Smith, who became the head of the Shoah Foundation in the United States, in the University of Southern California. And he persuaded me. We became friendly when he was building or being the consultant for the Holocaust Center in Cape Town, which I got involved. I got involved in helping to doing that, but I wasn't prepared to speak. And he made me go to Poland with my family in 2002. So this is how I became. And eventually I said I will only go with non-Christian, non-Jewish people. I will only go with Christian people. So my first trip was with the College of St. Elizabeth in New Jersey, with a bishop and nuns and teachers and some students who were, kind of doing their masters, and others. 30 of them went with me to Poland, and that was the beginning of my really getting involved. And then I got involved in the March of Remembrance and Hope, and I started getting involved in talking worldwide, Hong Kong, you name it, I've been there. United Nations, I spoke to, I addressed them on the day of commemoration of iniquity and genocide. They show my and dimensions of dimensions of memory and stuff like that. So I became very much involved, and I think it is very important. But I don't only fight anti-Semitism. I fight racialism. I fight, religious discrimination. To me, it makes no difference whether a person is a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, a Buddhist, a Confucianism. To me, a human being is a human being. And if you see them suffering, you got to help them.
Thank you. That's an excellent answer. And I'm seeing a lot of questions come into the Q&A, so I'm going to try to condense some of these that are asking some similar questions. And one thing that I'm seeing a lot of is if you would speak a little bit to how optimistic you feel about the world given our current climate and what advice you might have for students who are experiencing a world that does have a lot of turmoil in it at the moment.
Well, things are really not very good at the moment. Populism, nationalism, anti-Semitism, Jew hate is raising its ugly head. And the only way to combat it is, first of all, the world must not be bystanders. And Jews themselves must, I mean, in 1930s, the Jewish people always would say it will be okay, okay, God will look after us, but we are human beings and we were given free will. So we do things the way we want. So it's not doesn't regulate us. He just watches us doing all kinds of things which are not so very nice. And so I believe that students should fight not in a vicious way, not in with hate, but try and explain to their create. We have got, for example, in Toronto, we have got all the different Hillel students who getting together and try and create a climate where they can explain their situation, they can explain what Judaism is all about. We've had shootings here at Jewish schools, we've had, graffitis outside Jewish homes and Jewish businesses, and we've had lots of problems here, and the universities and everywhere else. But the important thing is to try and explain that we are no different to anybody else. Why should we be the canary in the mine? In the mine? Why do you feel that Jews are the ones? Whenever things are bad, immediately the Jews are being. So we have to try and explain the situation, but do it in a way which is honorable and correct. For example, I have had, over the years, I've been 20 times in Poland and Germany with students, mostly non-Jewish students. 95% of them were non-Jewish students from all the different universities, all creeds and all. I've been at Muslim weddings. I've been befriended quite a few Muslim people. And the reason how I managed to do that is because they accepted me as a human being, not just as a Holocaust survivor, but so come across as human beings and try and regard everybody as one. Try and befriend people, try and one at a time, just one person at a time. You don't have to try and save the whole. Listen, things have improved. I am an optimist. At the moment, I'm not so happy. I am depressed and I'm not happy. But remember, when Syria was in bad trouble and people started becoming refugees from Syria, millions of them were running away. Toronto, Canada, took in, according to the news, according to the government, 30,000 refugees from Syria. The Germans took millions of, hundreds of thousands of refugees from all over the place, from Muslims and others. They took Jews from Russia. They took everywhere. So the country that committed all these showers, they changed the way things going. So things are improving. They're improving drop by drop by drop. And and that's the only hope that we can have. In Dimensions and Testimony, which my alter ego is asked questions, one of the questions I was asked is, why did God allow this? Where was God? And I said to them, God, when he saw what was going on in Sodom, he destroyed Sodom. When he tried to saw what was going on in the world at the time of Noah, he tried to destroy the world. But he then changed his mind and he created that raft, which at least everybody that he thought was of a kind would be saved. And then he created a rainbow because I created them. And the rainbow reminds God that he gave us free will. So when God looks at the world, he remembers the rainbow. He doesn't intervene. But when he looks at what we are up to, I believe that he cries. He cries bitter tears to see what human beings can do. But basically, I still believe that in each person there's both goodness and also a little bit of evil. And sometimes there are human beings who manage to, like Hitler and others, which I'm not going to name names, who try and awaken us the evil inclinations.
And that is a perfect segue, sir, into some of these questions that we're getting about your personal faith. How did you maintain your faith during the Holocaust? And so to that note, also, how did you maintain hope, or did you maintain hope?
Well, to the first question, um, about how I maintained faith, I was brought up in a very warm Hasidic Jewish community. All my sinews, my blood, my whole being was immersed in the history of Judaism, of the thousands of years of our religion, of our culture, of our beliefs. And this was not even in the Warsaw ghetto. My father tried to take the little bit of money that he had to get a teacher to continue teaching me the holy books and things like that. So it was, and I remember in his attic when the deportations were, where my father was praying, and I was there, and he took his talus, the shawl that we use when we pray, and he took me and he put it over my head, and he put me to his feet. It was Yom Kippur, and we were hiding in an attic, and people were being killed and dying in the Warsaw ghetto, but we were still praying. So how could I? And then I found in Częstochowa in a so-called working camp where they worked you to death, and that wasn't the worst camp at all. This was a good camp. A man who went to the yeshiva together with my father, and he became a rabbi, and his name was Rabbi Godel Eisner. And Godel Eisner decided that he was almost certain that I was going to be 13 soon. He didn't know exactly. So he wanted to make me bar mitzvah. And at midnight, he made me bar mitzvah. He had a prayer book, he had the phylacteries, he had a shawl, and 10 men get together at midnight because we weren't allowed to do these things. And he made me bar mitzvah and he blessed me and he said, with God's help, in Yiddish, he said, with God's help, you will outlive Hitler. And then the magnificence of that in the last camp, I was chosen, and it's a long story, to work in the SS kitchen. So you can imagine what it is. I came from Buchenwald, skinny, like a skin. I was tall, but I was like a piece of skin. And there I could eat my fill. So at the evening, when we came back into the hall where we were locked up, I would give my soup and my piece of bread to Harav Godel Eisner. And he survived the war. He went to Israel and he became a head of a yeshiva. He remarried and he had children and he lived to a ripe old age in his 90s. And as far as hope is concerned, the other question, I became like a cocoon. I locked myself. My brain wasn't developed. My brain was only developed. Hadn't go proper schooling. I didn't have anything. My education, my brain was only educated in what's happening the Shoah, in the Holocaust. So I kind of lived in the second, hoping that one day a beautiful butterfly and life will change. But in the meantime, I covered myself in a cocoon and I became completely living every second, because every second of every day you could be killed, either by a guard or somebody else, a capo would beat you. I've been beaten badly in my Danek, which I still suffer to this day. I had 3 operations after the war in England to try and heal me, but the thing that I have left over, I can't get over it. And thank God I'm still, I we get medication for it, but that's what happened. And so I became completely immersed in the second. I became invisible. I made myself invisible because you try to be invisible and not to think about anything except existing another minute, another day. And this was, my whole experience. So I can't say that I had anything specific hope that I could actually relate to. I existed.
And one of our outstanding teacher fellows has asked a question I find really interesting. He says, "Did you tell us about your experiences as a cantor, and did you sing in the camps?"
I never sang in the camps. Um, because of my interest in music, and I don't read music, I've got very good sound. Although I'm wearing hearing aids, but I learned everything by hearing, and I love to listen to music. I belong to every music society that you could get, and when I was living in South Africa, I got involved when I was in my early 40s in a old age home, and they didn't have anybody to conduct services. So I decided, because I knew the services, I decided to conduct services. And the man who was in charge said, you've got a very nice voice. So why don't you become our cantor? And since then, when I came here, when I went to the Kiev synagogue, an Orthodox synagogue, first year in 1986, and they heard me, I was kind of, when you pray and you're a Hasid, you kind of do it a bit louder. And they heard me. They said, "Why don't you conduct some services?" And then after that, I became their full-time honorary cantor, and I started doing all the services and all the holidays and everything else. And I can read the Torah, so I started reading the Torah. And then subsequently, as I got older, we managed to also get other people to help out. But I still, to this day, occasionally, I don't do it on a regular basis because I find it, I don't like not walking to the synagogue. I'm Orthodox, and sometimes people come and take me by car, but I don't like doing that. And if the weather is bad and it's minus 20 or something like that, I stay at home. But apart from that, I try as much as possible. And last night, you asked me about last night. I actually, at the end of actually it was at the middle, they changed how it was working. And we had this whole ceremony in the Metropolitan University in Toronto. I chanted the El Mol Rachamim. El Mol Rachamim, Shochewen B'mrahmim. Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShekhinah. So this is what I do.
Thank you. And we have questions coming in also too about did you reconnect with any of your family, and did you find out what happened to your parents and your sister?
When I was in Majdanek, after 2 or 3 days, I discovered that both my mother, my twin sister, and my father, when you go to Majdanek today and you look at, they didn't get the chance to destroy the gas chambers. So when you go right, you can see the room with the showers where water came out. When you go left, you go to the gas chambers. So my father was murdered the same day that we arrived in Majdanek. And so was my mother and my sister, because I don't think my sister was a head shorter than me, and my mother would not let go of her. And if there was women with children, they would guess the women with children. They only wanted to keep slaves who were, either men or women capable of working. And I was chosen. When they asked me, I said I was 16. And I've got actually records today that I was born in 1927 instead of 1932. So I've got all the records from the Germans. It tells me exactly, that they accepted me as a 16-year-old. And of course, I was then arbeitsfähig, which means I could work. And this is, what did you actually ask me? I forgot by now.
Did you have any other extended family that you
Yes.
reconnected with after the war?
What happened was, um, I had a cousin in the Warsaw ghetto with his wife and daughter. And as I told you, our family were blonde and blue-eyed. So his wife, who was my first cousin, and her daughter, who was 4 years younger than me, she's now a professor emeritus in Israel, in the Hebrew University. And so when the uprising started, he managed to send them out to a friend of his. He was a very brave man. He fought in the resistance. And he fought in the resistance in 1944 in the Christian Polish resistance in Warsaw. And so they survived the war, but I didn't find them until 1948. They found me, actually. They looked at in the Red Cross people of survival, and they found my name. And they tried very hard to get me to come to Paris, where they live. It's another long story. So they survived the war, three of them. And another two cousins of mine, my first cousin, Shifra, my father's older brother's daughter, and my father's Auntie Hannah's son, Leibel, they are the ones. So five cousins apart from me survived the war. From my extended family, from my immediate family, and from nobody survived. No, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles of my mother and my father, nobody survived. The aunt in Warsaw was murdered, but I found those five cousins survived the war. Two of them survived Auschwitz, and three of them found refuge with Christian people who saved their lives on the Aryan side in Warsaw. And they survived the uprising in 1944 also.
And I'm looking at the clock. I know it's nearly 8:30 on the eastern part of the country and in Canada. And I appreciate all these questions that are coming in. I see we still have a lot, and I'm trying to kind of merge some of these that are asking similar types of questions. And so one more question we had from a teacher fellow is, when you went as a Christian to travel to Warsaw, did you change your name or have to get fake papers?
When I what?
When you posed as a Christian and had to travel
Yes,
to Warsaw, did you get
yes,
fake papers?
yes, yes. They had to get fake papers, and they had to be apart from the fake papers, they also had to be hidden, because my cousin and her daughter could pass as Christians because they were blonde and they were blue-eyed, and everybody could. But they still had to have proper documentation, and there was a special kind of organization that would fabricate very, very good false papers for people, especially from the Christian church and others who actually worked very hard to save some people.
Um, I know that my coworker Ken and I both are asking, sort of thinking along the same lines as we often do. And in short, we were both sort of wondering what sort of message you could offer educators, students in Tennessee, and if you do see any sort of optimistic hope in the current climate we're working in, what do you think that is, and how can we kind of move towards that?
I think the most important thing is to educate oneself that the teachers should know what happened before the war, how the whole thing started, and what happened with the history of the Jews over the seven thousands of years, the history of from the beginning, and also what they achieved and how they managed to exist and how they were, the whipping boy all the time, because being a minority, that's what happens. And it doesn't really matter what kind of a minority you are. I mean, people who are black suffer. Why? Because they're different. Well, Jews were different because they didn't accept the Christian religion. They kept on continuing being, Jews, and they were assailed from every side. They were kind of blamed for all the ills of humanity, because it's easy when you have a small minority and you don't want to blame your friend or your Christian friend. Then it's easy to say, when there is a plague, when the plague is what it called it's the Jews that brought the plague, and yet Jews are particularly very, very clean, and that's the reason why they didn't suffer from the plague, because they kept on washing themselves. You know that we don't eat until we wash our hands. We make a blessing, but we wash our hands. Before I take a piece of bread, I go to the washroom and I wash my hands carefully, so that I should have clean hands to make the blessing. So the thing is, it's easy to blame others. And I think if you educate yourself about the others and you see that they are no different to you, that they are exactly the same human being. When I finish my talk at a school, especially when they are young students, I tell them I have a torch of righteousness, which has got many flames. And it's not like the torch of the Olympics, which has only got one torch and tries to spread goodwill amongst athletes and so forth. So this is a torch of righteousness. And I give them the first five flames. No religious discrimination, no racial discrimination, no homophobia, no xenophobia, and above all, don't hate. Hate is vicious. It creates vengeance, and you want to, and take those flames, hand them over. I give them to you as a gift. Hand them over to your families, hand it over to your friends, and light up the world and make the world a better place, but only through education. If the teachers educate themselves about all these different isms that I call, then I think they would have a better, because I know that when I am at, like yesterday, and I had quite a big crowd of students at the university, I could see the empathy that was flowing from me to them and from them to me. And it made some difference. And each person can make a difference. Each person, not a big one, but a little one. And I think if we all do it, then we'll create a world which is a much happier world than which is it at the moment.
All right. Thank you so much, Pinchas. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I know that we still have questions that we didn't quite get time to, so please feel free to follow up with us through email, and we could certainly touch base in that way. And certainly all of you, please do be aware that Pinchas has an extraordinary book that we can also make sure that you are familiar with if you would like more on that, as well as a number of films, including one that I watched relatively recently that's really interesting, called The well, The Last Goodbye, right? And so done with Showa Foundation, and where you filmed, I think, for 10 days at Majdanek. And so I really, really want to thank you so much for being with us tonight and to thank everyone who's been here. And Pinos, thank you so much for sharing also the singing that you gave for us. That really added to it. I really enjoyed it. And I know a lot of my colleagues did as well. And some of my teacher fellows have been sending me messages saying how much they enjoyed hearing that as well. So thank you for demonstrating that beautiful, rich voice that I know you have for us all to enjoy tonight. So, and on that note, please, anybody that wants to follow up with the Tennessee Holocaust Commission, we would love
I
to hear
would
from
like
you.
to finish off with
Okay.
a Polish lullaby that my mother used to sing to us, and I've never forgotten it. I was a bitty infant when she sang this to us, and I've never forgotten. And I can still see her bending over the cot and singing to us in Polish. Jadą dzieci, jadą drogą, siostrzyczka i brat, i nawidzieć się nie mogą, jaki piękny świat. Jadą dzieci, jadą drogą, siostrzyczka i brat, i nawidzieć się nie mogą, jaki piękny świat. And I will translate it to you. They are a brother and a sister who are driving through the forest and they can't get over how beautiful the world is.
And I don't think I can possibly add anything to follow that up. So with that, I'm going to let Pinhas have the last word in that sense. And thank you all so much again. And please stay in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. Pinhas, thank you so much from all of us.
You know, it's
And
an honor to be with you. It really is. And you're far away, and I wish I was there in person, but unfortunately, that wasn't possible. So thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope you have a good time, and I hope that the world is going to change a little bit and make us happier. Bye bye.